So if you're not here for the Embracing DevOps, exploring the best practices and patterns, then you may be on the wrong session. So an overview of what we're going to just have a quick talk on a bit, just an introduction on folks using various solutions, the implementation checklist for DevOps, patterns, anti-patterns, best practices, and some of the offerings that WebH Solutions has around training in this area. So hopefully done with the fairly boring slides and now into the interesting stuff. So the question is, who are the folks using DevOps? And really, at this point, you know, DevOps has moved long beyond the buzzwords that started, and even some of the vendor patterns that we saw over the early years of really using DevOps, and into more of hardcore implementation, how to align your culture, how to align your technology, and really get everybody, every brain in the game, as Jack Welch would say. So not surprising that folks like Starbucks and Microsoft and Walmart and Netflix are using DevOps. And if you haven't seen the new Netflix logo, that's our little red N there. And then nice to see that our space program in the United States is actually using DevOps. Now, DevOps itself, as I'm sure probably most of you are aware, and if not, there's a lot of different views on what DevOps is, what it is not. And so we'll hopefully demystify some of that and add some value along the way here. Again, if you have questions, feel free to jump in, and if not, then we'll just keep rolling. So in terms of an implementation checklist, really checklists themselves, no surprise, like runbooks and some of the other pieces of DevOps, and really just agile project methodology and overall PMO are key to really getting to the finish line from where you started. So DevOps projects, like a lot of projects in this world, tend to, if not given some kind of metrics and measurement up front, end up at a finish line that may be 1 to 1,000 miles away from where you intended. So really key to getting to the right destination. And of course, you know, in terms of these checklists, there's no surprise some interest in really where did the term checklist start. And of course, Boeing, after a B-17 crash in 1935, decided to start doing checklists because the pilots experienced people had actually made a mistake and not done something that was just common practice back then, really unfettering one of the wing gears and subsequently blasted the plane into the ground at a fairly high rate of speed. So best practices and implementation checklists, and really any checklist, require you to not only review them, but consider that they're going to vary based on the organization. So, Dennis, what do you got? Nope.
What's that?
Do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, no worries.
Did I accidentally raise my hand? No.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We like to practice anyway. And thanks for being here. So again, all of these things in terms of checklists, we really need to be doing reviews periodically to make sure that they're still current. You know, we're going to talk about best practices and patterns and anti-patterns, but quite honestly, these are things that, you know, within an hour to a week to, in some cases, a longer period of time, are going to become stale. So, like anything else with the whole application development, testing, project methodology, agile, you know, just projects and programs for business solutions all have to be revisited periodically to make sure that they still are relevant, sustainable, reliable, scalable, all of those words that really convert to, you know, people getting gold stars on their reviews at the end of the year, or quarterly, depending on how your performance cycles work. So checklists that are pretty important in terms of this are really around automation, no surprising. Everything from, how do I understand where we are? How do I understand where we're going? How do I get notifications for things when there's something going right or going wrong? More important to most folks is when things are going wrong, but in terms of, DevOps leadership and even in the practitioner space, key to understanding how you're being measured in terms of success factors or even in terms of, hopefully nobody on this call, failure factors. So tools, are all the tools there that you need across the space, and we'll talk about some of that. Cross-functional teams in terms of communication, interaction, and just making sure that we, again, have every brain in the game as we're doing this. Bug tracking, all of these things that make all the difference. And in the end, these checklists develop into runbooks. The runbooks themselves can be considered documentation, but also into other forms of documentation, which is key. Agile, DevOps, and any other technology-driven focus, especially when you're going to try to do things that are lean and Six Sigma and the rest of the metric measurements for are we being successful all require you to periodically write things down and keep track of them. Going back into knowledge management and intellectual capital management, how are we a year from now or a year versus where we are now, and how are we going to get to along the roadmap to where we want to be when we get there. So Marty, do you still have a question, or you just got the hand raised? Perfect. So patterns and process. No surprise that in the scope of everything, DevOps is not like, we get to move back to the cloud where people were dropping, code in on the web server in the middle of the day and flopping the web server, doing a bounce, doing a fork bomb or something like that to fix things. Now the focus is really on trying to maintain uptime. And really in terms of process, if you look, companies like Google and Amazon and Netflix really set the benchmark here in terms of, maybe not 6 nines of uptime, but pretty darn close. If you think about these services, the last time that you saw downtime on any of those 3 sites was probably pretty surprising, and most likely was a result of something really wrong on the client side, less on the server and community side. So, it's hard not to when you talk about efficiency and effectiveness and really the patterns of DevOps, not to have a Peter Drucker quote, because as a management consultant, the notion of doing things right and then doing the right things is really a kind of a key point in terms of DevOps. So a lot of these pieces and bits have been around for a long time, and people have been doing automation and trying to make things reliable and scalable and the rest of it. But when you track it back through Kaizen, Agile, process theory, and now, in this decade anyway, DevOps and some of the other pieces around really being able to maintain uptime, being able to maintain business continuity, and really being able to implement business solutions at scale and agilely so that we can actually deliver value to the business people who are really paying for everything that goes behind the scenes with the DevOps that we manage. So DevOps builds on process theory in that we don't want to do anything that's not required, but the things that are required around minimizing waste through reporting and analytics, using the appropriate tools and processes and as important automation, along that, always key to understand where you are in terms of that roadmap and that really DevOps maturity or digital maturity, which some people will roll DevOps into, and then how are we going to get to where we need to be to make things less stressful? Because DevOps is really about de-stressing everyone's life. It's not so much about a technology focus. It's not so much in terms of a specific tool, or in some cases even around business, although business solutions, bringing them to market and time to market are obviously key for keeping these these initiatives going and really growing them across the organization. But really the metrics that tell us that we're doing well can easily be measured by the stress level of the team actually maintaining all of the rollouts that we have to do across, doing things in digital transformation and to avoid our companies from experiencing digital disruption. So transparency, key that the right people know everything, but better to, expose the information across a larger scale to get everyone's, thoughts in the game, and then be able to discuss them as necessary, then to, try to limit who knows what when. And then necessary communication, and one of the things you see recently, although many people have been using it for years, is really the notion of chat ops, and of course, we'll even talk in just a little bit about DevSecOps in terms of just making sure that we have everyone who's required to make sure that we're keeping data secure, we're keeping our customer information secure, that we're actually doing things in not a hasty manner, but in a time-compressed manner to meet the cycles that are there, while still limiting the amount of stress that people are experiencing in terms of servicing these business needs. And then, obviously we're all humans, and until that changes, there's going to be some need to mistake-proof things, and really tying back, the folks in testing or quality assurance into everything we do. This has changed in some cases as you start to see roles changing from both the executive suite down to, really practitioners or up to, depending on how you look at it and where you are in that chain, and then how we're really keeping things processing in a manner that's reliable, and that's going to keep us from staying up all night. And, to the folks in Google who are originally maintaining a lot of their sites, holding a pager or your cell phone under your pillow as you sleep, or waking up every 2 hours to check things after deployment because you really didn't have any confidence that it was going to stay running, and you didn't have the wiring to make sure that you could automate when things did go wrong, to roll back, to notify, to get the right people engaged so that you can make that downtime or that impact as small as possible across the footprint of your customer experience, whether that customer is internal, external, global. So tool sets, the key around tool sets really, and it to be honest, has changed, at least in my view, somewhat. And I should have stopped right up front. Hi, I'm George Neese, and I didn't do an introduction, so follow on me for not just jumping right in. I'm the DevOps stream lead for WebAge, and I've been in not only a consulting space but the business space since I was setting up the Apple IIe lab in my high school now more than 30 years ago. So that makes me kind of an old guy in computers, but no surprise, DevOps. If you've done enterprise applications or even smaller scale over a long period of time, you're going to have exposure to most of these tool sets, or at least the concepts behind them. So the keys here is really to get the tool that makes sense within your organization. Some tools provide functionality that's very complicated and very all-encompassing. Tool vendors themselves used to drive the discussion around DevOps quite a bit. Really, it was you buy our tools and you're going to be the DevOps wizards and everybody's going to be happy and you're going to make a ton of money. But, in the scheme of things, really the tools themselves are just like a hammer or a screwdriver or something else for a carpenter or for a contractor construction. It's just a way to get something done. And if the tool is not going to help you to get your job done, or it becomes too intrusive or too difficult to actually maintain or use, then no surprise, then those tools will change. If you look at some of the DevOps implementation folks that we talked about in terms of companies initially, no surprise that when we think about it, some of these have changed quite a bit. If you look at the use of Asgard for Netflix, they built their own continuous delivery platform. They found out that it did too much in some areas and too little in others, and now working with the different cloud vendors, they've actually, exposed that as Spinnaker. And a lot of these tools start out internally at one of these large internet companies that we expect to lead the way, and then become open source and usable for everyone. Now, sometimes they are more usable. In other cases, they're fairly difficult. I mean, Netflix moved from Asgard to Spinnaker because it was too hard to extend that tool, and it did things that would have been better managed in other tool sets. Spinnaker itself is used by a number of folks, and no surprise, we'll talk a little bit more about it, because here we have a convergence of really at least 3 of the major cloud vendors around Google, Amazon, and Microsoft in terms of supporting and really using that, and of course Pivotal as well. So if you don't have, sum up, if you don't have a tool in each one of these spaces, then probably you need to take a look at why not, and would it make sense to slowly get there. So culture alignment. I think I must have made the background in this the wrong color. Anyway, so we'll fix this slide as well, because it appears that some of the text has actually disappeared, and I went through the deck, but apparently I didn't do it as well. So I think maybe I need some quality assurance tooling on my PowerPoint deck. Anyway, so in terms of culture alignment, really the key here is leadership from within the organization, and hopefully executive leadership, down through the different groups that are part of it, and really the whole notion of communication and transparency. So granted, somebody still needs to come up with a budget to drive your initiatives, so that's part of your culture in terms of who pays for it. And really, when you think about the most organizations, development and operations and quality assurance testing and even leadership have all been, somewhat siloed in terms of their impact on development, application dev, rollout, and then in some cases just that ongoing maintenance cycle. Some of this talks, if you follow, Gartner and the rest of the folks who really provide a lot of thought leadership, some good and some interesting, around bimodal IT, being able to move fast on things where it's most time sensitive, time to market, and being able to move in a more regular pace for things that really don't end up being at the speed of light and the speed of digital transformation. So then we're going to jump in this case, into anti-patterns, because, start out with what is wrong, and then move to what is right in terms of this. Really, all of these things are areas where people can fail in their DevOps initiatives, and the more failures you have, the more you end up blaming either your vendor, the team, the process. And in the end, it's most likely because either there wasn't enough thought before, or you've moved too far down the implementation path before you lift your head up and look around to see what's going on. If the leadership isn't behind it, then DevOps isn't really going anywhere. If you don't involve everyone across the different teams, including the executives, the business, the security folks, operations, development, and there's more, right? Because quality assurance, of course, is key to this. Performance is key to this. All of these areas drive our application development and allow us to be successful. And of course, all of us are graded on our success factors and our ability to actually be able to meet the needs of the business in a manner that's timely, reliable, and with minimal customer impact in a negative fashion. If you blow it out the door and your customers are super happy, everybody's going to go about business, and there might be a few trophies awarded, but more likely, like human nature, if things go wrong, there's going to be a whole heck of a lot more to think about. So some of the other things, boiling the ocean, trying to put DevOps across a large organization, especially a global enterprise organization, pretty difficult to do, because number one, you most likely don't have the skills in-house to support that, and you may not even have the communication patterns, and result in failed communication that causes things to not go as you plan. The wrong tools for the job. I mentioned this in terms of tool sets. Some tools are more complicated to use, more complicated to actually roll out across an enterprise or even a small organization. And in a lot of the surveys that you'll read, you'll see that global organizations are doing fairly well in terms of their rollouts in the 20-30% range in terms of key success factors, and probably better than that in some cases. Different views in terms of leadership and people on the ground in those cases, of course, as well. But then when you think about very small companies, you would expect that maybe they wouldn't have the people, but they seem to be about peered up where we are with global enterprise, the many billion-dollar companies. And then it's the folks in the middle that are really, in most cases, lagging. So if you're in an organization that has 250 to maybe 1,000 or 2,000 folks, you may be actually in that group that's struggling because the number of people that you have and the process changes, it's harder to allocate resource, and it's harder to get everybody moving in the same direction in an organization that's actually in that medium business tier. So incorrectly loading the team, part of that, some of the heads down, as you have these tactical wins, make sure that you're sharing them, because the success stories are what drives people to continue to invest and really to continue to see this as something that's key to business as opposed to just a cost center. So lack of knowledge sharing, and it's funny because I left this one as the last on this anti-pattern slide, but quite honestly, it's probably the most prevalent in every organization, because the documentation that you write is not current in a lot of cases. The intellectual capital sharing within the organization and even how you navigate that is more of a how to keep people out of things than it's how to get them into that, and even capturing those failures and successes in a way that makes them useful, as opposed to something that just goes on and becomes basically, what we would have called in the old days as shelfware, but really, shelf bitware now, because if it's data that no one's able to access or look at to use to leverage in an easy manner when things go wrong, no one's going to use it, and in which case, what was the point of even, number one, writing docs in the first place, and then how are you de-stressing your team if they can't find a problem and the steps that were used to resolve it, a week or a year later when the thing occurs. So all pretty key in terms of, that whole notion of really what not to do. And what not to do is part of it. I mean, silos, I left that on there, but, silos is the funny thing because, growing up on a farm, a silo means a whole different thing in terms of loading with grain, and I don't see many companies with grain silos on their campus, although there are a few, surprisingly. So now the issue is not really silos so much, it's that not everybody is actually pulling all of the key people into the teams, or is trying to, marry up everybody together in one monolithic organization across all projects. And really, as you look at it into patterns, we'll talk some more about that and how that becomes a problem. And then really going back up to the top, change management and how we get things out quickly and effectively and with minimal mistakes, how we identify those issues quickly so that we can resolve them, and really choosing some tactical and strategic priorities up front so that you have a way to have quick wins. Because like anything else, DevOps is a long-term journey. This is not the journey of 10 feet. This is the journey of 1,000 miles. And you start with that first step, and other people in other organizations around you may be, halfway to the destination or feel like they're all the way to the destination. But consider that even people who have made what they consider as a successful DevOps journey have to continually retune and look for, tactical and strategic priorities within the organization to be able to more fully automate something, for instance, or to better report, to create dashboards that are more effective to letting the leadership folks help to drive. And that's, again, leadership has to be a part of this. It's not that we're running under the radar in a cowboy fashion like was done really so many years ago, and even, recently in some surprisingly fairly large organizations. So I better just double check and make sure that I have not been missing the questions. Steve, do you have a question? I see your hand up. Sorry, you were at the bottom of my list, and that was definitely not intended. Okay, good. All right. So the old days was really the tale of two audiences, and no surprise. I mean, DevOps, great story, especially around the hash. We're really, Patrick Du Bois and a small handful of other folks really came up with a hashtag because they wanted people to work better within their organization, going back to Velocity, basically one of the grandparent conferences for DevOps, and still a key place to not only learn but to network with others and understand where the industry is going. I hope that through this you understand what the point in time is today through the discussion, and so we'll talk a little bit more around it. I mean, in terms of developers and operations, different areas, but really more and more you're starting to see, site reliability engineers at LinkedIn and other titles where really development and operations are merging somewhat. There are areas where it makes sense to keep these things, maybe overlapped or marginally overlapped or even separate in terms of organizational structure with a DevOps group in the middle. And no surprise when you have very large organizations, a DevOps COE to start out with, and I hesitate to use the word center of excellence, but hopefully not center of mediocrity, to allow those groups to slowly overlap in some fashion. And then there's other organizations where they're really merging development and operations to be one thing. It doesn't mean that there aren't people whose roles are strictly development or strictly operations. So if you don't want to spend all your time in shell scripting or some other kind of automation scripting, you want to be a pure developer, or you want to be a pure operations people, those roles are not really going away anytime, at least in the rest of my 15 to 20 years in career, I would guess. But there are some definite changes, and it's not hard to see them externally if it's not going on in your organization, and understand how that modeling works, and then how to really understand how that's going to impact what you're doing within your own organization. And really the key is being able to bring it in-house, being able to have someone or some group or a number of people who can evangelize to the point of the value of DevOps so that it comes in, because in an organization that's doing DevOps and not doing it to really try to ink the last 5 minutes out of someone's day across the organization, it turns out to be a lot, I would say, more fun. And fun in business, you don't talk about too much unless you're on the sales and marketing side. But really, within development and operations, it shouldn't feel like you're fighting fires all the time. And some of those things are key. We don't have to go into some of those things around really digital maturity or DevOps maturity so much in this discussion, because there's only so big a data lake you can boil in 1 hour. But consider the fact that you have to measure your maturity scale. You have to align your tooling with the people that you have in-house, and how are you going to, if necessary, use an external partner, consultants, those kinds of things to add value for a short period of time, or even some cases a longer period of time, but always with the notion of taking ownership. Even if you're having an outsourced relationship, taking ownership of the key things that are going to drive business value for your organization. And a lot of times the operations and the development, some portion of that has to stay in-house to continue your competitive advantage. So then we're going to jump really lastly into this notion of best practices. And best practices and patterns and all of these things are great, but really they're stale almost by the time I write them, or somebody else writes them. That's why if you go out and you look, you could probably find, if you spent enough time on the internet, 1,000 different lists of best practices for DevOps. So this list is going to be fairly long because these are things that I think are important personally. I think a lot of them have been validated through ongoing project work that I've done in digital marketing, digital commerce, transformation, even talent, management, performance management across, very large consulting organizations as an Accenture and IBM guy in the past, and having worked for very small companies internally as well as, Global 200, Fortune 100 companies across the globe, implementing DevOps and what came before it. So best practices, and these all actually drain, fairly well in order in terms of, top 5. So pick, and 5 is just an arbitrary number. It sounds round. I use that. 10 seems too big. 1 seems too small. Unless you only have one application within your whole organization. In that case, don't make up 4 more just so you can get to 5. But hopefully something that you can do even within a monolithic app that you can get, some kind of tactical win to show the value of DevOps and really get people excited about it from the organization, from the business, from the teams internally. It's not about making your life harder. It's about making your life easier in not only development and operations, but business, keeping things live, keeping them, sustainable, maximizing the positive aspects of your customer experience and customer engagement. So there should be an executive sponsor in your organization. That could be the CEO, the CDO, the CIO, some other XO. It could be a steering committee, hopefully a fairly small one and not, 30 to 50 people. But somebody who's actually making sure that the organization is being measured and that they're actually meeting the needs of the business so that you can actually develop what you need, when you need, why, with the right people, with the right resources. Budget is key to DevOps. It's not like just because a lot of these things are open source that you can do them for free in your spare time. And really, if you have an organization full of people who like to be like the Dilbert, get locked in a closet and do work, 20 hours a day, that's awesome. You're probably making some really good margin on those folks internally. So teams should understand the business value. Why is it that DevOps is going to be important? What is it that you're doing as an organization to meet customer need? What is the products or services that you're delivering, and how is development and operations supporting that so that you can actually meet that time to market, that business value, and create business solutions around DevOps enablement that are going to continue to drive that and make you more successful, as well as identifying, possible additional opportunities that might be things for business growth and product growth. The more people who understand what's going on within a business, the less likely it is that you end up at the wrong finish line. So dashboard is in here, but that could be any number of different things. That can be, later on we'll mention scoreboards and metrics, but that could be as simple as reports. That could be an Excel spreadsheet. If you have something fancy, great, but how is it that you're getting the data into the dashboard in a timely manner and getting, reports out of the dashboard in a timely manner so that people can make decisions? And then how are you reviewing these kind of, reporting and dashboarding so that you know what needs to be added over time, because nothing is not only sacred anymore, but nothing is really, lifetime stable. There's very few things that you're going to be able to create today that are going to still be as valuable 10 years from now or even a year from now than where they were, and keeping an eye on that. So evangelization. Now, if you already have executive sponsorship, hopefully that person is evangelizing in one space. If you don't, then the key is really to work your way up the chain. If you're the only person in your organization who really values DevOps, and you're in a large organization, that would be kind of surprising, frankly. But even within organizations that are small, medium, or giant, monolithic, global enterprises, there's still the opportunity to be able to explain to people, why is this important? And it's not just, oh, here's these cool tools that let us do stuff, although that's important too. I mean, the tools have helped to drive the growth, and the tools are changing about as fast as you can imagine. I mean, there is there's a new tool to do something almost every other week, either as an Apache project or something internally that was released open source from a company. And of course, there's a lot of vendors out there. So the vendor space itself is fairly confusing. So before you evangelize about tools, evangelize about what is going to be the value to the business, because more likely that's going to get you moving. Tools, clearly a lot of business people are going to glaze over unless you're in a very technology-focused organization. So chat ops, this is kind of a funny one if you think about it, because when I saw this, I thought, well, gosh, isn't everybody already doing this? Because if you think about it, how long does it take to actually understand in a 30-person email thread what it is that you have to do, and how far down that stream do you have to go? It's not to say that you open a chat session and say, hey, can you drop the web server for 5 seconds? I've got to make a change. It's, I need this. This is happening. Reach out directly. In the old days, you would have had to pick up the phone or dial somebody's pager, but literally everybody has some form of chat now, and that's also important in terms of projects when you have vendors and third parties and partners, is really getting everybody on the same platform. If everybody uses something different, that becomes way more difficult. There's bridges you can put in place and all sorts of other different things between different chat tools, but really, part of it should be being able to ping somebody on a chat window and hope that they, respond in a fairly timely manner. If not, you can always send the email or make a phone call for sure, but, chat ops is really where it's at in terms of getting things done, and it keeps you in a personal communication space with other people in a global or distributed organization in a way that's way more personal than sending an email. There is still plenty of room for email, for writing lots of paper documents per se, or maybe soft copy of those same documents, but really being able to reach out and touch someone quick and get a response increases the trust, increases the teamwork, and really that's part of the key. Collaboration is a word you hear a lot, but really teamwork is probably more, in my mind, what the key is. Collaborating is great, you're creating something, the rest of it, but we're all on the same team in an organization. Whether someone has the same email address, domain as you do, if they're working on a project with you, you should be able to communicate with them and be able to get their attention when you need it as quickly as possible within reason. It's not as often that you can ping somebody in the middle of the night and expect that they're going to jump in. So infrastructure self-service. So in the old days, and old days for some people might be today, you had to fill out a request and do all sorts of other monkey business to stand up a development environment. Excuse me. But more and more you see people being able to, self-service those infrastructure requests. Granted, this is not saying anybody should be able to go in and modify the firewall. Nobody should be able to go in and turn off your encryption. Nobody should be, well, somebody should be able to, but everybody shouldn't be able to. So this does not mean everybody gets to touch everything, and now everybody gets, root access on your production servers or administrator access on your, your Active Directory. This means really that you should be able to, for development and even in terms of some, QA performance test, be able to stand up an environment that you can subsequently stand down without having to go through a 3-week process. And if you're there, then hopefully, you have something on the roadmap to get there. I mean, this really comes down to as well, the notion of software-defined networks and software-defined services. If you have to be sitting there watching on Black Friday to make sure that you have enough bandwidth, then that's honestly a pretty crappy way to spend your Thanksgiving weekend. And much better to actually be able to quickly, with the push of the button or a dial, be able to pull things back or put them up. And that goes back to another part of this infrastructure self-services, is the notion of being able to dial things up and down, flag-based features. dial features, push button features, things that you can turn on, turn off, scale up, scale down to allow you to be able to improve or increase the performance when you get that mythical Oprah book, web hit. So capturing knowledge gained along the way. The key here is not just capturing the knowledge, it's capturing it in a way that people can find it. Because just writing things down for yourself, will everybody just walk around with the knowledge base on their desktop or their laptop or their phone and see how far that gets you along the process. Because it's really about sharing. Long gone are the days, when I was a kid and I got into computers originally, there was very, very few people who would actually teach you how to do tasks that they did on a regular basis because it was part of their turf. And you still see some of that kind of turf war notions. Or even funnier is the notion that, somebody's going to take my application and they're going to stand it up and they're going to beat me in business. Well, if you're an enterprise, your application is so complicated anyway, by the time somebody stood it up, you would have rewritten 3 of the subsystems anyway, and you're long ahead of wherever they would be. So, not necessarily share things that are just ultimate competitive advantage per se, but there's a lot more focus on trying to limit people's access than there really needs to be. So refining based on metrics and really the whole notion of just revisiting things, is key to just being able to keep things on the path that's going to generate success for everyone and allow them to be able to win not only personally in their reviews and promotions and bonuses and those kinds of things, but really your business, so that 100 years from now your company's still in business and one of your great grandkids is probably working there. So publish what each team member knows and needs to know as part of the team is Kaizen. So Kaizen is key in terms of just being able to know who can do what. So especially in a global organization, there may still be things, tasks, knowledge that only one person is an expert at. But how are you doing succession planning for those things? Nobody should be of the notion that they're protecting their turf again. And so by having a board that tells each person easily where they are, what skill level they are in a particular task, how they grow that skill level, who else has that growth in skill level, and what the person up the chain from them has in terms of skills and skill level. It's a little scary at first because you're like, wow, everybody knows everything. But it's not like an emperor wears no clothes moment. But this is to allow you so that when it's time for me to take a vacation, I can go. And my stuff will still be alive when I get back, and no one's going to call me when I'm sitting, trying to surf in Hawaii, or I'm snorkeling on the Barrier Reef, or I'm just sitting, up north someplace, or down south, or east-west on a deck chair with my choice of beverage, and not dealing with the stress of life for a few minutes and being able to recharge. So stand-ups. This is a funny one because most stand-ups for a majority of the organizations I've worked for are really sit-downs that are called stand-ups, and you may actually still stand for them, or you may have a stand-up where everybody's sitting down and they may be, distributed across the globe. But how often do you see an actual stand-up that really lasts 15 minutes, unless it's just you and one other person on that call or that meeting? So trying to keep things, predictable there, because if you're having an hour stand-up every day with a 15-person or a 30 or worse yet, a 100-person team, and it's going to an hour, think about how much productivity you just lost for what little gain you're going to get. Most likely, majority of the people glaze over repeatedly in that kind of a conversation. Or funnier yet, you get the situation where everybody's on their phone or their laptop and they're not even paying attention to what's happening anyway until somebody calls their name. So the small project teams. So this small is really relative, but pretty key. Depending on the size of the app, small could literally be 50 people. Hopefully small is a slightly less number than that in terms of people, and those people are really cross-training themselves to be able to do any of the tasks they need on a daily basis, still allowing for some specialization because people have things that they like to do and don't like to do. Anybody who has everything they don't like to do is going to leave and probably take that information with them. So it's probably helpful to share some of those tasks as well. And there are things that to be honest, I don't like to do, and I still have to do them, and that's life. In a small project team, you get to do a lot more, and it's just like running a small business. You get to wear more hats. You, over time, become more valuable, and you understand that project, program, branch better than anybody, and hopefully can deliver that business value. So communicating in terms of scoreboard and metrics, we mentioned that as well, but really just being able to score your builds, score your defects, your bug resolution, all of those things to give people an idea over time how you're moving. And the scoreboard itself is, it doesn't necessarily have to be the right term, but if you're doing stand-ups and huddles and you're not actually talking about where you are in terms of the scoreboard, maybe there needs to be a couple of minutes there. So DevSecOps, funny enough, the Gartner folks, I think, are the ones who might have spawned this term. But, if you don't have security tied into your DevOps and performance and testing, I mean, I hesitate to even put DevSecOps in here because then what does this become? DevSecPerfBiz TestOps? I mean, if I'm just going to put every word of every team that's part of this in one tag, I'm going to have one big long thing that's hard to type and makes no sense anymore. But, really collaborative, team-focused. And, it's funny because one of the things that they called out at a conference that I was at was really the notion of, in terms of security, people want to have production data in their lower environments, but are you actually just pulling production and putting it into Dev and QA? That to me seems like a violation of DevSecOps, quite honestly. And there's lots more of them that you can think of. I mean, there shouldn't be everyone having access to your firewall, everyone having access to your encrypted credit card data or decrypted credit card data, those kinds of things. And hopefully, PCI and CID are key drivers within your development operations to make sure that you keep your customer and client data secure. So culture, promoting teamwork, I mean, that goes back to silos. When we talk about the priorities, have one at least be technical. Executive sponsorship we mentioned, again, in terms of both leadership, but sponsorship a little bit different, making sure there's somebody who actually acts on behalf. Teams understanding that, oh, did I just double click myself? There we go, I did. I started talking through the same slide. That was nice. Up arrow, down arrow. So Kanban, really allowing everybody to have visibility to dates. Makes sense if you think about it, because that's key to understanding when something is deliverable and then tracking to those dates. Everyone in this case, no surprise, being all of the different people, both internal and external to your organization, who are part of your team for doing application dev and support. So automating the heck out of everything you can that you do more than once, choosing the right automation candidates up front, and then over time getting to and automate everything pretty much. Document everything simply, no surprise. Try to keep things simple because otherwise no one's going to ever read it and the document becomes useless, quite honestly. Celebration, metrics, the culture I put back in again around teamwork, so I did have a duplicate there. And then, peer reviews, making sure that you have the ability to actually amend, adapt, revise, and essentially just continuous improvement, continuous quality across that. So there's some offering things in here around courseware that we offer, and I'll just blast through these. So intros, practitioners, architects. Our architect and practitioner classes really give you hands-on tool exposure so that you could roll out with really minimal, take the course and the labs and actually roll DevOps from end to end across the tool sets. And some other offerings around there. So I burned up and boiled that ocean. I only left 5 minutes for questions, and hopefully there are a few. Let's see here. I can. How do I? Let's see. Unmute the whole world. Da, da, da. So do I have to just unmute everybody? If you have a question, I'll I actually am not smart enough to know how to everyone it. Oh, I apologize for that. And if you don't have any questions, then, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending this deck out. Hopefully, you know, if you have some training needs, we can help you out with those. If you just have questions, I mean, we do digital maturity, DevOps maturity, you know, assessment type offerings as well, although those are usually specific to a company. And then, of course, with all of these, you know, we talk about training and learning, you know, we can customize them for your organization. So, Marty, did you have a question? Let's see what that question is.
No, I'm good, thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, so I won't give you back any time of your day because it's your day already, and you can do whatever you wish with that last few minutes that we had allocated. But I appreciate everyone joining. Feel free to reach out. I'm really easy to find, quite honestly, on LinkedIn or anywhere else. There aren't very many nieces in this world because it was an Ellis Island change to my great-grandfather's name. Having a niece in this country, not speaking English, and putting that name and relation in the wrong boxes. No surprise. He liked it. It sounded American and kept it, so I get to be George Niece. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everybody taking an hour out of their day to jump on with me and do a little embracing DevOps. So